Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Why Current THC Labeling is Holding the Cannabis Industry Back and What We Can Do About It. We're going to get going in just a moment here as I'm watching the Zoom room fill up with attendees, so to speak. But thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Very excited to get into this topic. This is actually a topic that our speaker today addressed in Cannabis Business Times not too long ago. And as people start filtering in, I'm going to drop this link into the chat. So please feel free to check that out as we're going through today's presentation. And like I said, today's presentation is Why Current THC Labeling is Holding the Cannabis Industry Back and What We Can Do About It. My name is Eric Sandy, and I'm the digital editor for Cannabis Business Times. Today, we're going to talk about how THC potency is conveyed to consumers across different product categories and different labeling conventions. Flower is sold as a weight percentage of THC. Vape cartridges are labeled as THC over total weight of oil. Edible manufacturers report their THC in milligrams per unit. And so who can keep up with all this? Dr. Markus Roggen says there's a better way. And during our webinar today, Dr. Roggen, the president and chief science officer of Delic Labs, a licensed cannabis and psychedelic R&D laboratory, will explain why the current labeling of cannabis products is complicated and gives customers the wrong purchasing signals, propagating the THC-first purchasing trend that many industry professionals are trying to combat. I know this is a familiar story for most people in the audience. Plus, Dr. Roggen is going to share findings that demonstrate that the way the total THC is calculated is wrong. He's going to provide proposed solutions to clearly communicating THC levels to consumers. These are ideas borrowed from systems used in the nutraceutical and alcohol industries, and these are ways that could help craft the right sales message. So before we get going, just a few quick notes up top. On one hand, on the bottom of your screen, you're going to see the Q&A button. If you click that, that'll open the Q&A box. And so please feel free to type your questions for Dr. Roggen as the presentation goes on. We're going to get to as many of them as possible on the back end of the presentation. Also, just know that we are recording today's webinar, and we're going to make sure to send a copy of today's webinar to all registrants via email in the coming days. So keep an eye out for that. You will have a copy of this in the future. And also, if you enjoy this conversation and you would like to pick up the thread in person, we're going to be doing just that at Cannabis Conference, the 7th annual industry event hosted by Cannabis Business Times. That's going to be August 15th to the 17th in Las Vegas. And you can visit cannabisconference.com to learn more, and make sure to sign up using code THC10 to save yourself 10% off the price. We're very excited to see you out there later this summer. And with that, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Markus Roggen. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for this kind introduction. It was actually all-encompassing, so I guess everyone already know what's going on. And I'm sure that everyone read the article. And if not, please do so. I thought it was quite some nice work. But I want to talk to you today about the problem of THC labeling. And it might just not be only be me that thinks about THC labeling as a problem. There are enough people and voices in the industry that complain about testing inflated numbers in cannabis testing, outright fraud and cheating in testing, selective sampling by producers, the constant hamster wheel race of making higher potency products. The consumer is chasing it, the producer is chasing it, and everyone seems to be losing out. So are there maybe better ways to think about it? But before we get there, the best way to share the suffering and pain is with a math problem. We all suffered through that in school, so let's bring back that memory of pain and get us in the right mindset that we have a problem. So my example here is Mary Jane buys an eighth of Lemon OG. So the strain has 23.3% total THC by weight. Then she rolls a half-gram joint at home, as you do. Now she takes 3 puffs. So how much THC has she consumed? right? Because in the end, that's what the consumer and everyone thinks about, right? How much THC do I get? And if the look for 23% THC was like, that is what she bought, then that must come with an assumption of how much she has then consumed. And I want that every one of you in the audience writes down the answer. We can share that in the end in the Q&A session. And I already know that every one of you is wrong. So one math question is not enough. Let's try this again. Because what the consumer is actually interested in is if you have two cannabis cultivars to buy from, a Baba Kush or Lemon OG, and they have different THC numbers, 20.2 and to 23.3, and they have different costs associated with them, which one gives you the most bang for your buck? Right? Because kind of that's what the consumer is looking for with the high THC number. They want the best value, I guess, or they assume it's the best quality. But if we just assume they're looking for value, which one of these two cultivars is the best value? And that is actually a relatively easy math question, and it's Baba Kush. It's cheaper per percentage point of THC. So by bang for your buck, maybe it's not always the highest THC number, but we have to do some math on that. These numbers, or this was actually inspired by some work we recently did. We looked at what price increase you get with THC level increases. And I will come back to that later on in the slide. So the outline for today's talk is that we talk about how cannabis is bought, why total THC is wrong, and there's actually more math. So look forward to that. Then I try to make the argument that current labeling is bad, and maybe I have some ideas for new ways. A quick introduction of myself and the lab. So I was already introduced by Eric. So the laboratory that I head, or where I do all my work, is Stelic Labs. We are located in Vancouver, Canada, because in Canada we can do everything. It's legal. The Health Canada, the federal health ministry, basically gave us a license to do all that work. And we are a bunch of chemists, so we mainly focus on process design, process optimization, analytics, and then some formulation research. But we don't do this alone. We always do that in collaboration. We do this in collaboration with the University of British Columbia, where we're actually located at, and my co-founder is a professor there. And we use lots of students that are very motivated to work in our labs whenever they hear that we have a robot that smokes joints. But we also work with other colleges like Loyalist College and very, very skilled scientists in the field. For example, Monica Beapando, formulation scientist, and Dr. Linda Klumpers, she's a clinical pharmacologist, and then a host of other companies. And how we do this with chemometrics, which is like math of chemistry, then kinetic studies, which is also math of chemistry. You see a trend here, right? In process analytics, computational studies. So we throw the kitchen sink of chemistry at cannabis and psychedelics, because we also got the license for that. Okay, how do we buy cannabis today? Yep, we're sticking with this. So this was a post of a friend of mine from San Diego, Dr. Josh Swider. He's an amazing analytical chemist. If you ever get the chance to work with him in California and the other states that his laboratory, chemical analysis labs is, great guy, great chemistry. So he reported that he went to a dispensary recently, and there were about 100 flower offerings. And the lowest THC number he could find on a flower was 31%, and the highest was 45. I left California for Canada 4 years ago, and when I used to work in California, it was like what 20 was like the cutoff on the bottom, and like people were like trying to get over 30% with their cultivars. I think the current number is 31 to 45. That's insane. I understand that with better cultivation methods, better breeding, better genetics, you will be able to push the total THC number in your flower up. But that's insane, that increase. Like I don't think that it can be explained by just process optimization. There must be some nefarious additional aspects to it. But that's not the cause. The high numbers are not the cause. It's a symptom of a larger problem. And so let's think about the economics of labeling. Right? The consumer looks and chooses the highest THC number. That's what we as generally see as accepted. And in what other industry is that done? Like where you narrow down a product to a single number and it's always the higher number that's better. I mean, in pharma, do you buy your medication by having the highest amount of the active ingredient? So I have some sleep medication, and if you look closely, you can actually find the milligram numbers. Like it's down here, it's here by melatonin actually somewhat, and then hidden down here is 25. So the left and the right ones actually have the same active ingredient, and so the extra strength is about double what the normal product here has. But did you know that before today? Like, did you ever look at the concentration of your active ingredient in your medication? Like, you don't really do this. And then another example would be, which is the best wine? So I took this picture from an article about the 10 most expensive wines, and these are the top 5. So which of those wines is the best wine? If I could see all, I would like to have hand raises here, but it doesn't matter because you're all wrong, because the best wine is definitely vodka, because it has 40% alcohol, and that's the highest number of all the ones shown in the picture. And that's not how alcohol users or buy wine, right? But that is the strategy a cannabis user is currently buying cannabis. And it's not that the cannabis user did it by themselves. The industry, the producers, the stores educated them that way. So we have to take ourselves to task that is a self-inflicted wound. Okay, back to the problem of total THC in the first place. I wrote about that earlier. The reference is actually in the article linked already. So total THC is the idea that cannabis flower produces THC acid, which decarboxylates to THC, and that there's weight difference. So instead of doing that math on flower, which gets a bit more complicated, let's do that on a pure THC acid crystal, right? This is pure THC acid. So if we do the math for total THC, which is THC acid times the factor to correct for its weight loss, 0.877, plus the total THC, plus the THC percentage, we get total THC. So as there's no THC in this crystal, but there's 100% THC acid, we obviously take 100% times 0.877. So this pure THC acid crystal has a total THC of 87.7%. Like, that can't be right. It doesn't make any sense. How can a pure substance not be 100% of that substance? And the problem is, you correct for the weight loss of the THC acid, but you don't correct for the weight loss of the whole sample. So you actually have to correct the math by adding a term for the product weight loss. That's down here. I assume you can see my mouse. It's last row under the line, right? So if we now correct for the weight loss of the sample, then we're back up to 100% total THC for pure THC as a crystal. Okay, so that's a fun, esoteric, academic thing. Actually, it's not, because if total THC is the important point for the decision of a customer to buy a product, then you're losing money, because as I show here in Lemon OG and Baba Kush, we saw them at the beginning of the talk, you actually get a little bit of a boost in your THC number. And as I mentioned, this was inspired by work where we actually did a data analysis of the market, looked at the prices, at the THC numbers of cannabis flower, and we found that you lose about 33 cents per percent point that a cannabis flower increases in price. So if we then look at the annual sale of cannabis flower in the US is losing out on $400 million worth of value. So there's a point to this that you maybe should have listened up in school and understand how math works. But there's also a drawback, because now your hemp is hot. As those numbers all go up, if you consider for the weight loss of the sample, now your hemp can jump over these 0.3% total THC by dry weight. That could be considered a problem. Okay, so everything has two sides. Okay, and aside from the math being wrong, I think you are expecting too much of your consumer. You want that new consumers come to the market, but then they go into a store and they see THC flower is sold by a THC percentage. Vape cartridges are either sold by THC percentage or milligrams per gram, which is not percentage, but like per 1,000, percentage per 100. Edibles are sold as milligrams per unit. So you have 5 or 10 milligrams in a piece of chocolate or a brownie. And tinctures are milligrams per milliliter. So you already have 4 different units in these 4 products that you assume that the consumer understands and can translate one to the other. Who is keeping track of this? Like, who really could say, if I could smoke a 25% THC flower, that's the same as taking that many drops of tincture? I don't think anyone can. So let's think about, can we do it in any other way? Can we present the THC number on the label in a way that the consumer is informed but not guided by it? So if we take the guiding aspects of THC out, we can then use other things to sell our products, not just THC. So my first idea would be to sell the buzz, not the dead weight. So this came from inspiration in the alcohol industry, where you have a standard drink. It's defined by every country slightly different, but the process is, it's a fixed amount of alcohol that you consume. So you already naturally know that you can drink more beer than you can drink vodka, because the volume changes, but the amount of alcohol, pure alcohol you consume, stays the same. And so standard drink is a fixed amount of alcohol, but the volume of the product, wine, spirit, beer, changes. So can we translate that to the cannabis industry? Can we use a fixed amount of THC or CBD for those CBD rich products that we say, let's call it the standard dank. We say a standard dank is 5 milligrams. And we just have to measure how much THC is in a gummy, in a joint, in a vape cartridge or a tincture. And then we label how many standard units or standard danks are in there. So now you package by units, and we could say every gummy is 1 unit, 1 standard dank, and joints are always 40 standard danks. So you would put more or less flour into the joint depending on how potent or how high your THC percentage in that flour is. But it doesn't matter for the consumer because they will always get the same amount of standard danks or the same amount of THC. And the same then is the same approach is used for a vape cartridge or a tincture. So the standard dank approach I just described is based on a fixed amount of THC in the product. But earlier on, I was talking about vape cartridges versus tinctures versus edibles. And you might already know that they do actually hit different, that they do behave different, because the ingestion versus inhalation leads to different effects. There's a delayed effect. There might be a stronger effect based on ingestion. So if THC consumption versus by inhaling it or eating is different, we can't really make the equivalent of by just going by milligrams of THC. We should consider the effect. So this is more now, my second approach here is more like a medical cannabis approach to sell the effect. And for that, I took inspiration by the international units. So who of you had this morning their daily vitamins? Vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin B. I'm just looking over to my table. And I assume I'm not the only one who had their daily vitamins. And you take 1,000 IUs of vitamin D, and you have no idea what 1,000 IUs are, but that's the number to take. And for vitamin B or vitamin C, it's about the same, right? It's 1,000 IUs. So IUs are international units, and they are a measure of effect. So they have nothing to do with the weight or the moles of the compound. So 1,000 IUs of vitamin D versus 1,000 IUs of vitamin B are neither the same weight of vitamins, neither the same moles of the vitamin, and even a vitamin D pill versus a tincture would have different amounts of vitamin D in them per serving size and still be 1,000 IUs, because it is purely based on the biological activity of that product. And that makes it so easy to compare different formulations and even different products. So could we use that? So here my idea would be to make intoxication units, IUs, where we normalize a serving to 100 IUs of THC or CBD. And for an edible, 100 IUs would be 5 milligrams, because I'm taking the Washington State rule here on, I think it's Washington State that has 5 milligrams. And so that is our 100 intoxication units. A pre-roll, we assume that one puff makes you as high as eating one edible. So therefore, a puff of a joint or a pre-roll or a vape cartridge would be 100 IUs. How much that is a milligram is something to research. And turns out I have a smoke robot, so ask me, I actually show some numbers later on of how much you inhale. And then for tinctures of CBD, it behaves slightly different because CBD, if you actually look at the clinical studies, they only start for treatments at 300 milligrams of CBD. So we also make that 100 IUs. So while it is 5 milligrams of THC, it is 300 milligrams of CBD. Because right now, the hemp industry is short selling you. They're selling you homeopathic doses of CBD because these like 10 milligrams of CBD, they don't do anything. There's no clinical studies that show anything below 300 milligrams of CBD. Just also the uptake in the body is so low. The availability of CBD that actually makes it in the bloodstream. So there's a distinct pharmacological aspect to this approach here. Okay. So if I could see you, you would complain, but it's so hard. That's difficult. Like intoxication unit, do all that research. Well, actually I did, and you can do it too. So we have a smoke robot. We actually looked at how much THC you inhale and how much CBD you inhale per puff and for a whole joint. And that's the table down here, the graph down there. And it turns out, and that's why I told you everyone is wrong with the question on Mary Jane, how much THC you inhale, because if you have a look to the leftmost bar graph, the puff count, you see that these are different. The first three are THC, these are CBD cultivar, CBD joints, but this THC joints, these three joints, were all the same flower. They were just milled at different particle size. And now if we look at how much THC you inhale per puff in milligrams, here scaled so that we can see it, there's a difference. It's the same flower, but it's a different average THC number in milligrams you inhale because we just changed the mill size, the grind size. So even if you know the flower you're using, if you don't know the architecture of the joint, you still have no idea what you inhale. So a home rolled joint, you can't control how much THC you inhale. But in pre-rolls, you can. And that's our research. How do we make this repeatable? So fun fact, small particle size, most THC per puff, but if you get more puffs out from a large particle size, so overall you inhale more THC from a coarse joint. And then CBD, weirdly, you get way more CBD per puff than THC, and we don't understand that yet, but that is research that's forthcoming. Okay, so this is in joints. So this is how much THC you actually get into the system. Oh no, how much THC you get into the mouth, or CBD. This is not yet the biological effect of like how much actually ends up in your blood, but did that work too? We did a fully randomized, triple-blind, comparator controlled, parallel, all the buzzwords of clinical pharmacology. They basically had two tincture formulations, and we looked at the THC numbers in the blood plasma and over time. So here you have two tinctures, and they give you different amounts and different times frames to the body. So even if we would have said same amount of THC in the product, it would have still had a different effect. So the intoxicating units could therefore be a way to normalize those two products, so that a consumer don't have to try every time they try something new. And when I was speaking with some producers that relate that information to me, and it has been publicly stated by the founder of SC Labs, Alex Dixon, in relationship to his work with the Emerald Cup, the real quantitative quality marker in cannabis is terpene concentration. And what I hear from producers is the first package is sold by the THC number, but the return customer comes for flavor. They then don't care about the THC number anymore. It is about the flavor. So while the high THC might sell the first time, they might lose the repeat customer because they actually were looking for something else. So, and if we even take a step back, THC, weight percentage THC is such a niche quality that has no comparison outside of the cannabis industry. Like no other industry does that. Okay, we have like percent alcohol in a drink, but who really looks at that if they choose a beer or a wine? You understand that there's a difference between a beer and a spirit, but when you're in the category, you don't look for the percentage anymore. So THC percentage itself is a niche quality, and the outside world doesn't understand that. So instead of trying to teach them something that I hope I made a good argument is broken, let's find something from the outside world that actually has a value, and let's bring that into the cannabis world. And so educate your customer about flavor and effect, not just the THC number, right? If we can hide the THC number, by intoxicating units or standard danks, then we can start educating and guiding the customer by flavor and effect. And because right now you're selling weight and THC number, change that. Sell a fixed amount or sell a fixed THC number and just sell convenience, not math problems. And just as a repeat summary here, the standard dank is the mass of cannabinoids before consumption. So mass of cannabinoids in the product, while the intoxicating units is the resulting effect after consumption. So it's not related to mass in any way. And with that, I thank my co-founder and scientific advisor, Professor Glenn Samis, who is the full professor at the University of British Columbia in the chemistry department. And I thank all my various semester students, exchange students, PhDs and postdocs that I'm paying for, and the staff in my team that came on full time, and we have a lot of fun with in the lab. And then here are some links to articles I discussed. They are also linked in the show notes, I understand, and I upload all my slides on SharePoint. So if you look for my name there, you can find this presentation. And with that, thank you very much. And I think we're opening the floor to questions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Roggen. That was fantastic. And yeah, just to follow up on what you were just saying there, I know we were chatting with a few folks. We will be sharing a link to the full video here. So as well as everything that Dr. Roggen just said, you'll have a link to the video here in the coming days. So keep an eye out in your email. Maybe to start with the questions here, you know, offline before this began, we were talking briefly about methodology and joint smoking studies, so to speak. So one person was asking, first off, they mentioned they love the approach of the IU, but how do you define or regulate a puff with humans when the draw pressure and duration of the hit can be different?
Yeah, right. So we're thinking about this too, because so our machine, you can program any way you can breathe. You can like suck in 6 liters in one go. You can have little puffs. You can have lots of puffs. You can have long puffs, short puffs. You can program that all in. So then the question, which one do you use? And the tobacco industry has been thinking about this for decades. So we are using the Canadian Health Canada approach for standardized vape testing. Should those numbers be properly adjusted for a joint versus a cigarette? Maybe. Studies have to be made, but right now we have a standardized method that every other lab uses, so we can go on that. And we can't do it perfect for every consumer because a large man probably has a larger puff than a small female when they smoke the same joints. But we try to get as close to reality standardized method as possible. And so right now we use the Health Canada method.
Excellent. If you could maybe go back a few slides to the results on the pre-roll slide. One person was asking whether the smaller particles equated to higher THC per puff, or just in general what the difference was in the grind size here.
Yeah, so we ground the same cannabis flower in various ways, so that we had a batch of 1 millimeter sized particles from that flower, and we packaged that into half-gram joints. And we did the same for 3 and 5 millimeters. So it's the same flower, just milled different, so that we always get the same. And so the paper goes a bit more detail, so I would point you towards the paper. But we saw that with a small particle size, 1 millimeter, you get about double the amount of THC per puff at the beginning than for the larger particle sizes. That then for all joints increased. So at the end of the joint, you inhaled more THC per puff than at the beginning. So there's like extra complication to this. So I really would please go and see that paper. And so while the small particle size gives you more THC per puff, the larger particle size gives you more puff. And so that balances out. And then in the end, the 5 millimeter particle size joint gives you the most THC overall. So if you look to the furthest right of the bar graphs, the recovery, you only get 30 to 60% recovery, meaning the THC that's in the joint actually makes it to your mouth. The rest is gone to the in whiskey making, it's called the angel share. So I think of it a bit as the angel share, like the THC you just lose to the world. While CBD has full recoveries, and you get all the CBD that's in the flower actually in your mouth, and we have no idea why that is so different between the two compounds.
Similarly, this was a bit earlier in the presentation, so I know you did come around to it toward the end, but one person was asking if you can explain how to look at the amount that is absorbed rather than that original form potency. And so if you look at nanoemulsions versus oils, have you gotten to that point in research and differentiating those types of forms?
No, we have not. So as I said, I've done a little bit on tinctures or emulsions. The Solutech study on the next page, that is actually an emulsion. But we did that study, but I haven't done any more on it. And that paper is again out for everyone to read. Oh, by the way, I see that Josh Swider gave a question. So I gave a shout out to Josh, and now he's actually here. So hi, Josh. Can I answer his question?
Yeah, please do. I know that came earlier. Yeah, if you'd like to, if you could repeat the question too. Yeah.
He says vape pens have gone up to in California. They are buying at the highest THC level. So I assume that a vape pen filled with THC distillate and then other flavorants, or even the whole rosin, like live rosin vape cartridge, these numbers have creeped up. They used to be like 70 to 80% when I used to live in California, and distillate can easily hit over 90, 95%. So we probably then now see in the in the 90s and high 90s. And Josh and I both have chuckled when we saw test results from testing laboratories that said there is 98% THC, 99.5% total cannabinoids, and 7% terpenes in that vape oil. So if we add that up, that is a number greater than 100%, which doesn't make any sense. but apparently these are test results you get back quite frequently from testing laboratories. And at that point, it's either stupidity by the laboratory staff or blatant cheating. They're not real results. Okay, sorry.
No problem. I'm just trying to keep some questions together here. So as we're talking about that particle size from that pre-roll slide, a real quick follow-up question from Taylor in the audience. Were all the particles at 5 millimeters, or were they just under 5 millimeters?
No, they were all around 5 millimeters. So we separated out them. So first, we have a mill that is really good in getting a particle size set. And secondly, we then use sieves to separate out the ones that are smaller or larger than 5 millimeters so that we stick to the 5 millimeter.
Absolutely. You know, I know we spent a lot of time here talking about the IU idea, and someone in the audience has mentioned, of course, that the overall effects of cannabis products can vary widely from patient to patient, and certainly when including medical cannabis patients. How can we dig in and with more detail define the IU, especially when for a lot of medical populations, of course, we're looking for that higher THC to begin with?
Sure. So first off, I made 2 recommendations. So I'm not saying I'm right. My argument is just that everyone else is wrong. I'm not saying it has to be that way. I just want to say, let's think of other ways. And IUs is more on the pharmacological side, and that's not a chemistry question. So I can like point at it, but I don't fully understand it. And I'm open to admit that limitation of mine. I don't actually know how you test that. But then the argument that everyone behaves if is affected different by cannabis, that might be true, but everyone is affected different by other medications as well, and they have figured that out. So I think it is possible, but I'm not the right person to answer that. Please ask our pharmacologist, like Dr. Linda Klumpers. She would know.
Absolutely. We have a question here relating to speaking physically, the beginning and the end of a joint. One audience member is referencing hearing that you get double the amount of THC per puff in the beginning of a joint, so to speak, and then also hearing that at the end of a joint, you end up inhaling more THC per puff. I don't know if your studies have gotten into that, you know, the sort of the spatial movement along a joint.
Yes. So also this is like, please read the paper, because like talking about this with my hands is actually quite complicated. So when I said you get double the amount of THC per puff at the beginning of a joint for the 1 millimeter versus the 5 millimeter. So that is comparing 2 different types of joints. But if you look at the same joint, you get more THC per puff at the end of the joint than at the beginning. So there are these 2 aspects, right? If we said that there's double the amount at the beginning, that is between 2 joint types. If we say how that behaves from the beginning to the end of a joint, that is within the same joint. And my assumption is, our best working model that is so far held up to all the experiments we've done is the air you inhale is around 40 degrees hot Celsius. But the boiling point of THC at 1 atmosphere would be 425 degrees Celsius. So THC is not in a gas phase. It's an oil droplet. And these oil droplets will flow through the joint, through all the other flour to get to your mouth. So these oil droplets will just get stuck on the flour that is between the burn and the mouthpiece. So you are kind of artificially increasing the THC levels of the THC flower that's closer to your mouth. So when you then get to that, you have more THC in the flower to inhale. So that's why it increases over time.
Love it. I think that's just a good fact there, some good trivia to share with folks in the future. I think that's
so basically We also looked at terpene levels. So actually at the beginning of the joint, you get the highest terpene levels and they are all gone by the end of the joint. So if you want the flavor, get the first puff. If you want the highest bang for your buck, smoke the roach.
Perfect. That's a quote to live by. We have well, first of all, a lot of folks are asking for that link to the paper. I don't know if that was in the list of links at the end there, Dr. Roggen. I know that we're going to send this follow-up email around to everybody, and I'm making a note now to share that specific link. Is it this third one down?
I'm like having the question boxes in front of it. I can't. So the first one is the wrongly calculated total THC. The second is the paper in your magazine about the labeling. Then the third one is the Solutech study, and the fourth paper, Cannabis Science and Tech, that is the smoking paper, particle size.
Fantastic. I know folks can sort of jot these down, but I'll make sure to include these in our follow-up email as well. I know people are asking. We're getting a couple questions here too, just about kind of next steps. And I know that's not necessarily up to you. You're merely making this argument. But I guess one way of phrasing this question is how have these studies or how has this conversation been received by either regulators or labs? Are you I know folks in the audience here seem to be pretty excited, but what kind of feedback are you getting and what kind of runway do we have to maybe make some changes?
So I was at a conference 2 weeks ago where I had a very similar argument presented, very similar slides. I also talked about the publication in your magazine. And doctors, medical professionals were actually quite open and interested in that approach. The producers, you can tell where they come from. The legacy producers like, no, we have always done it this way. But then the producers who might have come in a little later, or try new ways, new creative ways of products or manufacturing, they might be more open to it. But you can also tell the age of the regulated market seems also to be related to how they approach this. So if you have California or Colorado who have run a system for a long time, like, how do we change this? But when I then had to talk to European people that were visiting, where we have a clean slate because we don't have a recreational market yet, they're like, maybe we should do it right from the beginning. Changing it later on is hard. It can be done because other industries have been able to change stuff. Even Britain managed to get away from imperial units and is now on SI, so on Celsius and kilometers. Only the US didn't. Like, they were thinking about it in the 70s and then didn't do it. But like, if a country can change and go from miles to kilometers, I think an industry can go from total THC to something new.
Well, and I know you mentioned SC Labs and the Emerald Cup, and certainly the State Fair in California. They did some cannabis awards last year and moving into this year where terpenes were sort of foregrounded. One person in the audience was asking, are high terpene results what a consumer should be looking for when evaluating the best quality cannabis? And so that's one question. I might also add on to that. When you're looking at overall terpene content, you're often dealing with small percentage numbers. And so it's hard to get a sense of what those, 0.5% or maybe 3% overall terpene content, what that really means. Do you have a similar thought relating to IUs for terpenes?
I'm not sure so I've never thought about it this way. So thank you for proposing this. IUs, in my mind, is for the active medical ingredient. medical ingredient. So THC, CBD. If we go by the entourage effect, then yeah, terpenes have a medical effect, but I leave that to Ethan Rutho to fight for. That's not my battle. And yes, they are smaller percentages, but please have them smaller percentages, because if you have a vape cartridge that is 90% terpenes, please do not inhale that. That will not be good for your lungs. Does it need to be a number? Does it need to be weight percentage? Can we just leave all the math out for the consumer in the marketing or advertising aspect, and we just talk about this is that many IUs and these flavors, and then flavor forward or mild? I'm now spinning because this is completely new question and I hadn't thought about this yet. So very cool. I will think about this over the coming weeks. So stay tuned for the next article.
Fantastic. Yeah, certainly some food for thought there. We've had a couple questions about the role of labs, and this might be getting a little far afield of the specific topic, but one audience member was asking if there might be a certain equation, or without getting too far in the weeds, maybe just a certain way of thinking about how labs should measure and convey total THC percentage. You know, we do see some variance from lab to lab, not only in the results themselves, but sometimes in how THC is measured. This is almost opening up a whole Pandora's box, but do you have any, I guess, thoughts for how labs might rethink the way they present this data on COAs?
Okay, Josh, please put your comments in the chat. My quick one is add up your percentages. If they go over 100%, there's something wrong with your COA. Please correct that. Secondly, when I started in the cannabis industry, which is now about 10 years ago, so I'm kind of ancient, but I'm also relatively new to this field, they did total THC by just adding up the two numbers instead of doing a weight correction for THC acid. So the math of total THC already changed once. So why can't it change a second time? But the regulator has now enshrined this math because they just took it face value when they were told by industry insiders how it's done. And I'm a research chemist. I'm not really a regulatory chemist. I do not enjoy the long drawn out fights and arguments with regulators on changing that. I leave that fight to people who are way more skilled in that aspect than I am. Yeah, the regulator should be able to do their own math and have figured that out earlier, and please update the regulations. That could be one. There was a time when cannabis laboratories were giving the old way of total THC and the new way of total THC, and they give like both numbers and pick one. So maybe you start reporting a new number as well, like just add it to your COA as like extra information and slowly move the needle that way. And then which exact method you do to measure your THC, the regulator hasn't even figured out what the standard method should be. So I'm not here to say the answer. But then I'm based on at a university, and I use LC-QTOF to do all my measurements. But I'm not sure if anyone else wants to buy a machine that costs over $800,000 to do THC quantification.
Yeah, maybe not in this economy right now. But so of course, regulators, we're talking about a lot of different possible solutions that would be a long time coming in terms of implementing them. I'm curious, though, along the way, either in your experience in dispensaries or anecdotally that you've heard from people, are there ways that the retail part of the supply chain can better convey this to consumers rather than getting into complicated math? Are there, oftentimes you'll go to a dispensary and you'll see charts that demonstrate what different terpenes do. You'll see sometimes really great terpene profiles on product labels. Are there anything that you've seen in dispensary environments that might help this problem along in the short term?
So I've been following the chemical research on categorization of cannabis for years, and I'm very interested in that. So there's the idea, instead of going by indica versus sativa or cultivars, the genetics, you go by chemovar, the chemical profile of the plant. And so there has been good work by Fisher Dick and others, Hasekamp, on categorize, like finding like 3 to 7 different categories that all cannabis products fall under, so that they can be compared or distinguished. So could that science be a starting point for the sale, a point of sale to like categorize the cannabis flower into these areas? Maybe, but if you go in a wine store, there are the grapes, there's the grow region, and then there's the color of the label or the design of the label that sells the wine. So if we are a recreational market, maybe we should think about it how wine stores do it, and think about, but then you can't ship across borders in the US, so that's a problem for you. But in Canada, you can. So you could have like the BC flower versus the one in Ontario, or the historic one from Quebec. So you could do regions-wise. You could do flavor-wise, but then you need like a sommelier cannabis professional to give a flavor advice. And then on the medical side, there really is outcome. And I leave that to the pharmacologists.
Absolutely. Well, at any rate, these are all very interesting conversations to dig into, and certainly a lot of very intriguing proposed solutions to a problem that I feel like comes up in just about every conversation that I tend to have in this industry. So as we're coming up on the hour here, I certainly want to thank everybody for attending today's presentation. Like I said a few times, I know you can jot these links down right now, but we'll make sure to include these 4 in our follow-up email so you can continue reading Dr. Roggen's work. And of course, if this conversation hits home, or if you want to continue this conversation, not only can we make some connections after the fact, if you'd like to reach out to me or the Cannabis Business Times team, but we're planning a conference. We're going to be in person in August 15th to the 17th, talking about topics just like this. You can visit cannabisconference.com to learn more, of course. And since you attended today's webinar, please go to cannabisconference.com. When you sign up for the show, use code THC10, save yourself 10% off, and we'll see you out in Vegas in a few months. And in the meantime, though, Dr. Roggen, thank you so much for this presentation and your time. This was fantastic. I think we all learned a lot.
Thank you very much for having me.